And outspeak brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds? For the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods.
Good morning, passengers. Welcome aboard today's repositioning flight turned emergency transport for a bunch of Fantasyland people and video game programmers. I'm Captain Yoshido, my co-pilot is Mr. Apoto, and our flight engineer is Mr. Orante. Today we are flying non-stop to Brandenburg Airport in Germany, where you will meet your connecting flight to Bromma, Stockholm. Our estimated flight time is 9 hours, so settle in and enjoy that spacious, empty cabin back there. We are now reaching our cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign will be turned off momentarily. As soon as Captain Yoshido turned off the PA system, everyone let out a deep, relaxing sigh. The 6 members of Callie's SWAT team started to remove their body armor, taking it in turns to visit the bathrooms at the front and rear of the cabin. The 2 members of the Countermeasures Committee both relocated to the first class area and sat down in the reclining chairs. "I have decided adventure is not for me," Hurton said. "I can't wait to get back behind a desk." Meanwhile, the creations were depositing their backpacks in the empty seats a few rows back and taking stock of whatever they managed to bring along from the bar. Unable to get her mind out of work mode, Marisol stood up from her jump seat. "Come on, guys," she groaned. "Bags go in the overhead bins, and... hey, Aisling, what is that?" Trig had passed a backpack to Aisling, which the fairy took with undisguised greed on her face. Aisling unzipped the bag and removed a very large object that smelled sweet. Blake elbowed his way over, took one glance, and said, "That is a 10-pound slab of chocolate. Are you planning to share that with us?" The look of scandalized horror in Aisling's face suggested she was not planning any such thing. Meanwhile, Trig had found a blanket in one of the overhead bins and was curling up in one of the window seats. "We're in for a long ride, I guess," he said. "Anyone got an interesting story to tell? And not you, Blake. We've had enough of your stories." Everyone laughed. "Okay, that's fair," Blake said. He reached over a seat and found 2 duffel bags. "Hey, Callie," Blake called back. "Tell your guys thanks for getting my personal stuff out of my house. Just saying, you could have left the musket behind, though. I wouldn't have complained." "I wanted to take it back for study," Callie replied. "Hey, Marisol, they've got your stuff here as well," Blake added. "Your skateboard, your laptop, your notebook, and..." Blake did not finish the sentence. Marisol snatched the small, diary-sized commonplace book as soon as Blake held it up. "Oh, you have your own stories in there," Conti blurted out. "Why don't you tell us about those?" Marisol blushed. "Those are stories I'm not ready to share with people yet," Marisol replied. "I thought you mind readers would be able to figure that one out." "Again, it's the way I write them," Blake said. "Even if it's obvious, they still have to say it aloud for the reader's benefit. But this has come up twice now. I might change that for my next story. Maybe." Blake leaned back in his seat, looking lost in thought. Emily stroked his hair for a moment, stopping when Blake flinched, and then looked around. "There's something I don't understand," Emily said. "I've heard that some of you were told there was a plot to kill Blake, but others, like myself... Akira told us that Blake can rewrite our stories, change our worlds. Which one is it?" "Hey, yeah," Varian said. "She's right. Mina and I were told to try and kill Blake outright, but now that you say something... That Akira girl in the uniform said I could force Blake to change my story," Aisling chimed in. A deep growling drew everyone's attention. Sebakira was turned around in the first class section, her front paws dangling over the back of a reclining seat. "Our foe does not have a united vision," Sebakira said. "Perhaps their group is just as fractious as our own." "Why not?" Bella chimed in. "From what Callie said in her report, these rogue creations were just kinda making it up as they went along, fumbling their way to some distant end goal." Bella's words seemed to have an effect on Blake. Out of the corner of her eye, Marisol saw his expression darken. "Make it up as they go along," Marisol repeated to herself. After a moment she understood. Blake Robinson's writing style went in two phases. First, he would create the setting, then decide on how he wanted the story to end. In the second phase, Blake would make up the story as he went along, allowing characters to figure out their own path to the ending as though they had free will. Emily had also noticed that Blake seemed troubled and tried to talk to him. He tried to brush her off, then reached into his coat pocket. "Hey, Emily," Blake said. "This is a type of stone you can only get in Michigan, my home. I'm sure you're the right person to take care of it." Marisol was amazed to see that Emily's face lit up like a kid on Christmas as Blake gently pressed a small piece of fossilized coral into her hand, a Petoskey stone. Emily said, "It's so small and precious. I'm going to do a rock rejuvenation ceremony on it." Emily got up and moved to the back of the plane, sitting down at a window seat. "What was that?" Marisol gasped. "The only way to make her shut up and leave me alone for a minute," Blake said. "Emily is a really New Age type of character. Believes in the supernatural power of ancient rocks and crystals and stuff like that. Also, she's a video game character at her core, not a narrative one. Manipulating her is infinitely easier than the others, like flipping ones and zeros." Blake was looking past Marisol. She turned around to see what he was looking at. Sebakira and Conti had both stopped their own conversation with Hurton and were now glaring at Blake. "What?" Blake said. Conti flapped her wings and shook her head in a disapproving sort of way. Then she resumed speaking to Hurton. Around this point, the light of sunrise started leaking into the plane. All of the window covers were up, so many of the creations stopped what they were doing to admire the Canadian frontier in the daylight. Aisling sat down next to Marisol and held up a large piece of chocolate. "Oh, thank you so much," Marisol said. "And what is this?" Aisling was holding up one of the airline's safety pamphlets, normally stowed in the seat pouches. "What does it say?" Aisling inquired. "That explains how to save yourself if there's an emergency on the plane," Marisol said. "I keep forgetting you don't know how to read." "Can you teach me?" Aisling asked. "Is that something I could learn?" Marisol froze. Could creations learn new skills outside of their own stories? Was that even possible? Marisol had no idea. "Well, maybe," Marisol replied slowly. "I might be able to teach you." But before Marisol could continue this train of thought, there was a loud clattering sound, followed by a man's voice saying, "Roger, my aircraft." Captain Yoshido departed the cockpit, making sure the co-pilot and engineer locked the door behind him, then entered the passenger area. Yoshido was a Japanese man in his early to mid-40s. He was starting to lose his hair and had a very stern kind of face. Standing in the divider between first class and business class, he said, "So, Reyes, you've been up to a lot since the last time I saw you. What happened?" "Where do I start?" Marisol groaned. "Right at the very beginning," Blake suggested. "I think we know everyone's story here except yours, Marisol." "What's to tell?" Marisol replied. "I don't lead an interesting life like all these folks back here." She jabbed her thumb at the creations. "Aw, come on," Trig said. "If we read your mind, I bet we could find something interesting that might be worth talking about." "I mean, I've been on a miracle flight once," Marisol grumbled. "Oh yeah," Captain Yoshida laughed. "That old lady who screamed and cried that she needed a wheelchair to board the plane and that she deserved to be given preferential treatment by all of the FAs, including you. I remember her." "Then we landed, and she walked off the plane like nothing was ever wrong with her," Marisol finished. "That was fun." Trig clapped his hands. "See? Stuff like that. I bet I could find—" Very suddenly, Marisol remembered exactly why allowing a teenage telepath into her mind was a bad idea. She was about to say something when Trig let out a gasp of laughter. He was staring directly at her, clutching at his chest with one hand and holding his other hand over his mouth. The young creation had a downright lecherous expression on his face. Far too late, Marisol realized what had just happened. Similar looks of dawning realization appeared on Conti and Sebakira's faces. "Oh, I get it now," Conti said. "That's why this pilot was able to help us. To use a human term, it's a quid pro quo. The captain here owed you a favor because you previously allowed him to mate with you." Steam could have risen from Marisol's head. Her glasses fogged up completely. Embarrassed beyond all reason, she sank into one of the middle row seats, trying to hide from view. Captain Yoshido covered his eyes with one hand and let out an exasperated sigh. Trig looked across the aisle at him and said, "Dude, nice." "You shut up," Blake shot back. "It's rude to make comments like that." "It's not that big a deal," Marisol pouted. "I'm not the first FA to hook up with a pilot, you know." Conti landed on the headrest of the seat next to her. She seemed to have realized that speaking Marisol's secret aloud like this was a very bad idea. Conti gave Marisol an apologetic glance before quietly stepping away. For the next few hours, Marisol was mercifully left alone. The creations talked among themselves about Malum Ralpakin and his strangely complicated plot. Meanwhile, Callie, Bella, and Hurton interrogated Blake about the most minute details in his stories. Captain Yoshido dropped by just long enough to hold Marisol's hand for a minute before returning to the cockpit. At some point, something fluffy nuzzled its way under Marisol's hand. She absent-mindedly stroked the kitten, which began to purr loudly. "Hi, Aisling," Marisol said. The kitten jumped onto the floor and then shapeshifted into a human. Aisling was lying on her back on the floor. "Please don't lie on the floor," Marisol said. "You have no idea how filthy airplane floors are." Marisol and Aisling adjusted themselves so they were sitting side by side. "I'm sorry," Aisling muttered. "For what?" Marisol asked. "They humiliated you. I didn't do anything." Aisling sounded like she was going to cry. Marisol reached out and drew Aisling into a hug. "Oh, you're such a good friend," Marisol said. "Tell you what, if you really do want to do something to help me out, I'll make sure to help you in return, okay?" "Okay. Sure," Aisling mumbled. The creations raised their voices, arguing over some detail Marisol did not care about. She turned to look at Aisling, really taking in the fairy's appearance for the first time. Aisling had changed, just a little, but changed enough since their first encounter that Marisol could notice. Aisling was slightly chubbier now, perhaps an effect of eating too much candy in a short span of time. Also, her eyes had shifted color by the smallest amount. They were no longer the deep red of sunset. Instead, Marisol could tell that Aisling's eyes were just a little lighter in color than before. Marisol took a lock of Aisling's white hair in her hand and gently twisted it. "Your hair is so beautiful," Marisol said. Can I braid it?" "You want to braid my hair?" Aisling asked. "It's so wild," Marisol breathed. A few minutes later, Marisol had retrieved a hairbrush, plus one of her old hair ties from her travel bag, and set to work on Aisling's wild tangles. Aisling seemed to enjoy being groomed. As Marisol worked, Aisling grabbed the fabric of her own dress, kneading it with her fingers in exactly the same way a cat would. "You have a sister?" Aisling asked. "Yes, Mariposa," Marisol replied, "and a brother, Gabriel." I feel... Aisling could not find the right words. "I felt something about you, something I didn't understand." "What, something strange about me?" Marisol asked. "When was this?" "When we met," Aisling replied. "The first time you said your name. Your full name." Marisol paused, fistfuls of Aisling's hair in her hands. "Oh," Marisol breathed, starting to work again. "Well, I have a very religious name. My family are Catholics. They named me after Mary, Our Lady of Solitude. Catholics are taking over Ireland, Aisling said, back where I'm from. Marisol fought the urge to pause again. Yeah, I remember writing that. Why? Marisol could not resist the urge to pause. Huh? She said. Why'd they name you after the Catholic lady? Marisol chuckled. It's a long story. It's actually... Marisol realized she had just backed herself into a corner. This was going to be a long flight, and Aisling was now looking very curious, peering at her with wide eyes. Marisol sighed. All right. Sit up and face ahead so I can do your hair. I wrote your story. It's only fair I tell you mine. You have your own story? Aisling asked. Yep, Marisol said. The story of how I became a miracle child.